Good afternoon. Today we will be discussing what eminent domain means and its significance in the Constitution.
It is important to understand the meaning of eminent domain before we begin our presentation. According to Oxford Languages, eminent domain is the right of a government or its agent to expropriate private property for public use with payment of compensation. With this power, the government can take one's property even if a person is not willing to sell or give up their land.
To begin, we are going to examine three different Supreme Court cases that highlight eminent domain within the Fifth Amendment and delve into how the court interpreted this power. The first case is Penn East Pipeline versus New Jersey. The Penn East Pipeline Company needed to take New Jersey land to build an interstate pipeline. This case involves whether private companies are permitted to seize state-owned land through the power of eminent domain. The Supreme Court ruled in a 5-4 majority opinion defending the Bill of Rights, ruling that state-owned land is allowed to be seized by private pipeline companies to build interstate pipelines. Law and Liberty says state and local governments can and do wield the awesome power of eminent domain to compel the transfer of property from one private owner to another in the name of urban renewal or redevelopment.
Our next case is Kelo versus New London. In this case, the city of New London, Connecticut used eminent domain to seize private property from Suzette Kelo and other private property owners to sell it off to developers. The city aimed to create more jobs and increase tax revenues with this land. The Supreme Court ruled in a 5-4 majority opinion that the Bill of Rights allowed the government to take Kelo's land. They agreed that the Fifth Amendment protected the city's rights as it does not require literal public use, and that this land was going to benefit the city as a whole and not just the developers. The concept of public use could encompass a broader definition of public purpose or public benefit. According to the Institute for Justice, now, instead of a public purpose, condemnation would be upheld based upon expected public benefits, emphasizing the court's loose interpretation of this power.
The last Supreme Court case we will be covering is the City of Escondido versus Pacific Harmony Grove Development. In California, the City of Escondido filed for eminent domain action to seize land to extend the road from an owner who argued for industrial compensation. The case was taken to the trial court and concluded that the city followed a constitutional dedication requirement, meaning that the government can legally seize private property for urban development or infrastructure purposes. With this, the trial court used the project effect rule, which determines compensation separately from the project, and ruled that it was inapplicable in this case. This is because the attainment of the specific piece of land had been a part of the city's original plan before the owner's purchase. In correspondence with the trial court in California, the Supreme Court affirmed the rulings. The Supreme Court stated that the city was abiding by the dedication requirement, and therefore the city would be allowed to compensate the owner with nominal value, as this land had been required to be a part of future development in previous years.
One major current event that connects to eminent domain is the U.S.-Mexican border.
For many years, the U.S.-Mexican border has been a heavily debated topic and one that eminent domain is frequently associated with. Eminent domain would allow the government to acquire private property for the border infrastructure project. This would heavily impact surrounding areas due to the seizure of homes, businesses, and separation of communities.
If the issue of the U.S.-Mexican border was brought to the Supreme Court, the court would be able to use the dedication requirement to prove that this is a constitutional act. This is due to the fact that the seizure of land would strengthen national security, thus benefiting the overall public.
Ultimately, by reviewing these cases, we have decided that eminent domain should not be repealed, but instead the government should install limitations on this power. Eminent domain has been proven to be beneficial in urban development programs. However, it has simultaneously been proven to harm the individuals who have been stripped of their property.
As stated in the case of Penn East Pipeline versus New Jersey, private companies are permitted to take private land if compensated accordingly for public use and urban construction. However, a possible loophole within this ruling is if these private corporations were to act selfishly as a means to benefit their businesses by taking private land for projects that do not benefit the public, but still compensate the property owners accordingly. Law and Liberty states that if land is taken for said urban renewal, the Supreme Court would still rule in their favor, leading to corruption.
Additionally, due to the Supreme Court's strict or loose interpretation, the effect of eminent domain differs from case to case. For instance, how the Supreme Court interprets the meaning of public use within the Fifth Amendment changes the limitations of this power and how it may be utilized, as demonstrated within the Kelo versus New London case. Correspondingly, how the Supreme Court interprets a fair market value price to compensate the owner of a land has a crucial impact on the just compensation the owner receives. Therefore, amending this amendment will ensure a stricter interpretation, eliminating any possibility of abuse of power. Thank you.